nails. I realized they grew, and I didn't cut them after Purim. So, okay, in this moment, in this weekend, we are celebrating. Let's see, here's the part about talking and music at the same time. Give me 1 second. And this weekend, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the first bat mitzvah. It's amazing. And I was sharing earlier that I had the privilege of meeting the first bat mitzvah. She was a young girl. I met her when she was an older woman. I met her in the 1980s, Judith Kaplan. I met her at Kala, which was a Jewish BBWO B'nai B'rith kind of intensive 6-week Jewish camp that I feel led to my decision to be standing here in front of you. So she carried this legacy throughout her life of being this first bat mitzvah. She didn't choose it when she was 12. Her father did, but she carried that legacy and owned that legacy. And, you know, I am so excited to invite in a moment Rabbi Bronstein to come up and speak tonight, Artie Immerman to speak tomorrow on this theme, and I'll be also offering special blessings tomorrow on this theme as well for the Torah service. But as Rabbi Bronstein is speaking on this 100th anniversary of the first bat mitzvah, it is she who has served also as such a pioneer for women and has opened so many doors for women, girls, genders, people of all genders to step on the bima, to step forward in leadership and in light, and has been a mentor to me, of course, and has grown all of us here at Congregation Har HaShem. So I can think of no better connection to this 100th anniversary than to have Rabbi Deborah Bronstein teach us this evening. So I'd like to invite you up.
Should I take this off?
It's totally up to you. I had mine off because I was alone, so you do it, I can move away, you can take it off, you're totally fine.
So thank you, Holly. You know, when one person takes a step forward, it can change history. And we're on the anniversary of that step forward. March 18th, 1922, Judith Kaplan was called to the bima to become the first bat mitzvah in Jewish history. Judith was the oldest of 4 daughters born to Lena and Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. Judith was precocious intellectually. She learned how to read English at the age of 2.5 and began studying Hebrew at the age of 3. She was also talented musically. Between the ages of 7 and 18, she attended the Institute of Musical Art, which became known as the Juilliard School in New York. Throughout her life, she was an academic, a Jewish music writer, a teacher, and a theologian, and she inspired people like Holly Berman. Judith's bat mitzvah was created to address Judaism's gender imbalance. A bat mitzvah, of course, is the female equivalent of a boy's bar mitzvah, signifying entrance to religious majority. The Shabbat service on March 18, 1922, at the Society for the Advancement of Judaism Synagogue in Manhattan, started out like any other. The morning prayers were recited, the Torah service, the Haftarah, but then something radical happened. Judith Kaplan, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan's 12-year-old daughter, stood up from her seat in the pews and walked up to the pulpit. She recited the preliminary blessing, read a portion of that week's Torah portion in Hebrew and in English, and then chanted the closing blessing. Her bat mitzvah was the first time that a woman led the congregation, period. As such, it represents a significant shift for Judaism in America. Until this time, women did not engage in public reading of the Torah, and a Jewish girl's transition from childhood to adulthood was not reflected in synagogue rituals. Reflecting on the ceremony many years later, she said, "No thunder sounded, no lightning struck. It all passed very peacefully." At the age of 82, Kaplan celebrated a second bat mitzvah. This was 70 years later, this time chanting from the Torah itself. Various feminist and Jewish leaders from the second wave of feminism, including Jewish and feminist activists Betty Friedan, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, the social justice leader Ruth W. Messenger, and the U.S. House of Representatives Elizabeth Holtzman, and many more were present. Today, in every movement of Judaism, bat mitzvah ceremonies are celebrated, even within Orthodoxy. It wasn't out of the blue that Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan thought to give his daughter a bat mitzvah. Kaplan talked a lot about the impact of the 19th Amendment of women's suffrage. Seeing women gain the vote in America, he realized that as more and more opportunities were created for women in the secular world, that unless the Jewish community overtly affirmed the equal status of women, then it was likely that they would just leave Jewish life. And he wanted to capture the creativity and the participation and the leadership possibilities of women within Judaism. Kaplan first brought up the idea of the bat mitzvah ceremony at a synagogue board meeting on February 5th, 1922. He said, "I think we should institute this new ritual. I think we should be creating a ceremony of parity for girls, and I would like to propose that my eldest daughter, Judith, who turned 12 a few months ago, become the first." And the board enthusiastically approved. And just 6 weeks later, didn't give her a lot of time, his daughter Judith took to the bima to mark her entry into Jewish adulthood. Now listen to this. Rabbi Kaplan literally decided the night before what she would do. Only because she was both very well educated, unusually musically adept, and game was she able to step up to this mitzvah. It is important to point out that the ceremony that Judith had, though trailblazing, was not exactly like the typical bat mitzvah of today. She stood below the bima, where the Torah is read, and she didn't read from the Torah scroll, but instead from her personal chumash, her personal Torah commentary. The Torah itself, she said in her memoir, was a respectable distance away. But by marking her bat mitzvah, Kaplan did open the door for other girls to do similar ceremonies, which they did at first in modest numbers. This one step, a single young woman's bat mitzvah, began the journey of women to a new status in Judaism. So that was 1922. It wasn't until 1950, 28 years later, that Mordechai Kaplan's congregation voted to allow women to be called to the Torah for their bat mitzvah. They also decided to count women in a minyan, the 10 people required for public prayer. Rabbi Kaplan began to look into the role of women in a broader way. What about carrying the Torah on Simchat Torah, which girls were not doing at that point? The girls themselves said, if we can read from the scroll on our bat mitzvahs, so that taboo has been set aside, surely we can carry it as well as those old scrawny men. Curiously, Reform Judaism's commitment to egalitarianism actually served as an obstacle to the recognition of the bat mitzvah in most Reform congregations. Since the 19th century, the Reform movement had focused on the newly created confirmation service, largely abandoning the bar mitzvah service altogether. However, girls pushed for a change. As Reformed congregations slowly took back the ceremony of bar mitzvah, girls spoke up for themselves. One such girl was Rosalind Lieberman of Oak Park Temple, B'nai Abraham Zion. On the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of 1940 or 1941, Rosalind Lieberman addressed the rabbis and congregants saying, "Dear parents, rabbis, and friends, I feel honored and happy to know that I am the first girl at our temple to have the privilege of becoming bas mitzvah. It has been a custom in Reformed congregations to celebrate confirmation for boys and girls alike at the age of approximately 14. In recent years, we have added to our Reform ritual the observance of bar mitzvah, and in some temples also the bas mitzvah. Our rabbis have given me the privilege of becoming the first girl in our temple, to be bas mitzvah." Now, at the other end of the spectrum, there was an Orthodox congregation called Anshe Emet in Brooklyn, led by Rabbi Jerome Tov Feinstein. In 1944, after a bar mitzvah, a mother came over to him and she said, "Rabbi, why don't you do something for the girls?" So this was 1944, a really important time. The impact of World War II and the beginning of the understanding of what was happening in Europe and the murder of millions of Jews made this mother's question about the future of girls' participation in Judaism especially vivid. And the rabbi said, "I'm going to do it." The following spring, he implemented a bat mitzvah class. It was a group of girls who would study together, and then they had a ceremony together as a group. And then he said, girls should be given the opportunity to eliminate the feeling that in the Orthodox synagogue, they do not count. Because of Orthodox Judaism's strict adherence to Jewish law, their ceremonies usually look different from those in the more liberal movements like our own. But in 1993, Chabad created bat mitzvah clubs, which met monthly and were designed to empower girls between 11 and 13 years old to become strong, smart, and spiritual. Despite the gains of the 1940s and 50s, it would take a couple more decades until women started to gain true equality in American Jewish practice. In 1972, for example, that's 50 years ago, Sally Priesand became the first woman in the United States to be ordained as a rabbi. A year later, the conservative movement officially allowed women to be counted in the minyan. Our congregation, like many, began to celebrate the adult bar and bat mitzvah, or b'nai mitzvah, around when I got here. After a serious period of study, adults who'd never been given the chance to be called to the Torah as young people learned to lead the congregation in prayer and to chant the Torah. Tomorrow morning, Artie Immerman, who's sitting right here, a member of our first adult B'nai Mitzvah class, will talk about her experience. When you consider the entire sweep of Jewish history, this major shift happened rather speedily. It was these girls themselves who began to chisel away at the gender divide between men and women in Jewish life. What began as a corrective to girls' and women's lack of public place in Judaism opened doors to other marginalized groups, as Holly said at the beginning. They opened the door for Jews of all backgrounds, all stripes, colors, conversion, non-conversion, secular, observant, young people with disabilities, young people of various sexualities, to come up to the bima and, in an authentic way, to be accepted and embraced by the Jewish community at large. Now, may we do more than recall this important date and corrective. Let us continue in Judith's path with ongoing creative and vital acts that will bring life to Judaism. Ken Yehi Ratzon. You're welcome.
Thank you for your incredibly powerful words and helping us understand our place in that story. And certainly, Rabbi Bronstein, you helped us find our place in that story. Thank you so, so much. Thank you, thank you. The Aleinu is on the bottom of page 586.